Welcome to this week's question and answer session. This week's question comes from Pam on Noster, and she writes, "What's the best and simplest way to join wood, solid wood? I am using marble, commonly found in tropical countries. Janka rating about 8 to 9, Class A, similar to oak I would think. I've used Meranti to build a garden bench, which is stronger, but struggled as I don't have the strength to drill the screws in. Nailing was relatively easier, but not easy. I've seen some videos on dovetails and glue joints, but building a dovetail from wood would be way out of my skill set." Thank you very much for submitting your answers. It's a good question, and I have two thoughts on it. The first one was, you said you were having trouble drilling the screws in, which makes me wonder if they were pre-drilled. A lot of times people don't pre-drill for the screws, and they're really tough to get in unless it's a softwood. So you often I always pretty much pre-drill screws now, and they sell a little screw pre-drill with a little countersink at the top to countersink for the head. They sell those at most hardware places. I would pre-drill everything, and if you get it sized right, it shouldn't be a problem drilling the screw in. I would, without seeing the projects that you're doing, I would recommend a dowel joint. Dowel joints are a simple joint, and you can get dowels in basically any size, and you just pre-drill both ends of the joint you want to do, and then glue it all together. It's the same basic strength as like a mortise and tenon joint, but far easier to do. I would there's little, I don't know exactly what they're called, but they're a little plug that you drill a hole in one end of your joint, and you put this plug in it, and on the other end of the plug is a little point. And when you put your two pieces together, that little point marks where you need to do the second hole for your dowel joint. So it's kind of a little jig, and they're very inexpensive. I mean, you could buy a set for, about $10, $15 or so. But that's what I would recommend as the simplest joint. And it'll get you used to woodworking and lining things up, and it's probably a pretty simple joint to start out with. The second one I would recommend does require special equipment, but it can be used for a lot of different things, and that's a biscuit joint. Biscuit joiners are relatively inexpensive, and there's many different makers that make them. There's DeWalt, there's Porter Cable, I'm sure there's some others. Any of them are probably pretty good. For as much as you use it, you're not going to wear it out. But a biscuit joint can be used for a lot of different things. They're a strong joint, but for like garden benches and stuff, your dowel joint will be your strongest joint. Another way of joining wood would be a pocket screw. And you can get pocket screw jigs for, under $100 US. And they're good. They're good in just the way they hold things together. They do require glue. And then they do have, you got to kind of hide the pocket in the screw. So, they can be used inside cabinets and stuff like that, the carcass of the cabinet, just where you kind of hide it. But that's another good way of joining things. But I would recommend those. Your dovetail, I've been working with wood for 30 years and still have yet to do a dovetail, so yeah, don't worry about that one. Moving on to question 2. What's the best legs for solid wood? This is a 2x4 foot shelf and drawer. I'm looking at something high, minimalist, and classy. Hence was thinking of long hairpin legs, but not sure if it can sustain the weight. The other iron legs looks boring. Well, without seeing the project, I'm going to think you're probably talking about like a square leg, like 2x2 or 4x4 or whatever. It's going to hold the weight, but your problem will be the sway or the racking of the cabinet itself. Now, you can use cross bracing to correct the sway, to stiffen it up. But if you get too high of a leg, you're going to get some wiggle out of it. So you're going to have to stiffen it up somehow. Now, if you do a cross bracing, that would be a perfect joint for that would be the dowels. You can dowel that together. It'll take a little bit of lining up and a little bit of, watching what you're doing, be careful what you drill. But that would be a good joint for that. Now, if you were to do like a 2x2 or 3x3 or whatever, you can always taper the bottom of the leg itself, the bottom 6 inches or so. A good tool for that would be a miter saw, like what I'm pointing at. You can just clip that bottom edge of your leg and taper it down to give it a little bit of a finished look instead of just square all the way down. But that's what I would suggest as far as minimalist. You're going to be, that doesn't scream a turned leg or anything. So that's what I would recommend. If it just gets too high, you're just going to have to brace it, because if you got a cabinet up there, that's a lot of weight, and then you got little spindly legs, you're going to need something to kind of stiffen the whole thing up. Or, a rail in the back maybe would stiffen it up a little bit. There's different ways you can do it, but that's my thoughts on that. Her third question is, any brand recommendations for nail guns, and when do you normally use it? For plywoods? Brand recommendations, I like two brands that I've just recently bought. That's DeWalt. I have a DeWalt finish nailer, and then I have a Metabo, which used to be Hitachi nailer. I like both of those. Both of them are good brands. When you use it, it depends on how you use it and what size. There's different sizes of nail guns. There's staplers, there's finish nailers, there's several different types of finish nailers, and then, of course, there's framing nailers and all that. For a beginner woodworker, I would suggest a finish nailer of some sort. There are finish nailers, there's 18 gauge, and then there's 16 gauge finish nails. And the 18 gauge is a thinner nail, and it's good for light trim work, just light tacking things together when you glue them. Like if you're gluing together a carcass for your shelf and drawer, and you cut a dado in one, and you put the glue in it, and you put the plywood into the glue joint. To hold it together, you can shoot, just a couple of finish nails in it. You can use the 18 gauge for that. You can use the 18 gauge for different sizes of trim. It's a very handy all-around size. They come in lengths of 5/8 to all the way up to 2 inches. So you can, there's a lot, it has a lot of different uses. Other than that, there's a 16 gauge finish nailer. It's a bigger gun, requires a little bit more air. The problem with the bigger gun, it does have a bigger nail, but it creates a bigger hole when it punches that nail in. So you got to be able to fill that hole out before you finish or stain. So it can become a little troublesome because it's punching a pretty good sized hole. So I don't use it as much. I use the 18 gauge. The 18 gauge punches a little bitty hole, and it's real easy to fill before you finish. You say for plywoods, you can use these for plywoods. If they're a multi-layer wood plywood, they work just fine. If it's a lumber core plywood, works just fine. The only problem is if you ever use an MDF plywood. MDF is good for if you shoot a nail from front to back, you know, through the thickness of it, you're fine. If you shoot a nail in the edge of it, it'll split because those MDF layers are laid in and kind of like strata, and they peel apart real easy. It's not my favorite plywood by no means. I don't really like working with it. So, but for plywoods, it's great. And then there's all sorts of like 1/4-inch staple guns, you know, the framing nailers and all that. But for general woodworking, you're good to go with your 18 gauge. And then if you want to buy another one, a 16 gauge. And those are angled, they'll be angled. The 18 gauge won't, it'll be a straight nail. So that's my recommendations on nail guns. They're very handy. Use them whenever you can. You just got to be cognizant of how you're finishing the project and all that. So anyway, thank you very much for your questions, and I hope I answered them. If anyone else has any questions, just drop them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. And then until then, keep building.